On Christian Andersen's Fairy Tales, adapted from Carolyn Peachey's translation by Charlotte Dixon, and illustrations by Jadis Rebiansky. Thumbelina. Once upon a time there lived a young wife who longed exceedingly to possess a little child of her own, but she did not know how to get one. So she went to an old witch woman and said to her, "I wish so very much to have a tiny little child. Won't you help me to get one, old mother?" "With all my heart," replied the witch. "Here's a barley corn for you. It is not exactly of the same sort as those that grow in the farmer's fields, or that are given to the fowls in the poultry yard. Sow it in a flower pot, and you shall see what you shall see." "Oh, thank you," cried the woman, and she gave the witch a silver sixpence. Having returned home, she sowed the barley corn as she had been directed, whereupon a large and beautiful flower immediately shot forth from the flower pot. It looked like a tulip, but the petals were tightly folded up as though it were still a bud. "What a lovely flower!" exclaimed the young woman, and she kissed the pretty red and yellow petals. And as she kissed them, the flower gave a loud bang and opened up. It had indeed become a tulip, but on the small green point, the center of the flower, there sat a tiny little girl, so pretty and so delicate to look at, but her whole body scarcely bigger than a thumb. So the young woman called her Thumbelina. Pretty varnished walnut shell was given to Thumbelina as a cradle. Blue and violet leaves served as her mattress, and a rose leaf was her coverlet. Here she slept at night, but in the daytime she played on the table. The woman had filled a plate with water and had laid flowers around it, while the stalks lay in the water. On the surface floated a large tulip petal, and on it Thumbelina would sit and sail from side plate to the other, using two white horsehairs for oars. That looked quite charming. And Thumbelina could sing, too, and she sang such low, sweet tones as ever were heard before. One night, while Thumbelina was lying in her pretty little bed, a great ugly toad came hopping through the broken window pane. The toad was such a big creature, old and withered looking, and wet too. She jumped up on the table where Thumbelina lay sleeping under her rose petal. "This is the wife for my son," said the toad, and she seized a walnut shell with Thumbelina in it, and hopped away with her through the window and into the garden. Here flowed a broad stream, its banks muddy and swampy, and it was here that the old toad and her son dwelt. Oh, how hideous and deformed he was, just like his mother. "Rex, Rex, 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 Rex." That was all he could find to say on seeing the pretty little maiden in her tiny walnut shell. "Don't make such a riot," said the old mother toad, "or you will wake her, and she may easily run away from us. For she is as light as a swan down feather. We will take her into the brook and set her down on one of the large water lily leaves. It will be like an island to her who is so slight and small. Then she cannot run away from us, and she can go and get a stateroom ready down under the mud where you and she are to dwell together." Out in the middle of the brook there grew many water lilies with broad green leaves, each of which seemed to be floating on the water. The leaf which was the farthest from shore was also the largest. Out to it swam old Mother Toad, and on it carefully she set the walnut shell with Thumbelina. When the poor tiny little creature woke the next morning, and when she saw where she was, she began to weep most bitterly. There was water, nothing but water, on all sides of the large green leaf, and she could in no way reach the land. Old Mother Toad was sitting down in the mud, decorating her apartment with bulrushes and yellow buttercups, as to make it as gay and tidy to receive her new daughter-in-law. At last she and her hideous son swam together to the leaf where they had left Thumbelina. They wanted first to fetch her pretty little cradle and place it in the bridal chamber before she herself was conducted to it. The old mother toad bowed low in the water and said to her, "Yes, my son, he is to be your husband. You will dwell together very comfortably in the mud." Was again all her son could say. Then they took the little bed and swam away with it, whilst Thumbelina was sitting alone on the green leaf, weeping bitterly, for she did not like the thought of living with a withered old toad and having her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes, however, that were swimming to and fro in the water beneath her, had seen the toad and heard what she said, so they now put up their heads. They wanted to see the little maiden. And when they saw her, they were charmed with her delicate beauty, and it vexed them very much that the hideous old toad should carry her off. No, that should never be. So they surrounded the green stalk in the water, whereupon rested the water lily leaf and gnawed asunder with their teeth. The leaf floated down the brook, with Thumbelina on it, away, far away, where the old toad could not follow. Thumbelina sailed past many large and small cities, and the wild birds in the bushes saw her and sang, "Oh, such a sweet little maiden!" On and on, farther and farther floated the leaf, and that is how Thumbelina traveled into a different country. A pretty little white butterfly kept fluttering around and around her, and at last it fluttered down on the leaf, for he loved Thumbelina very much, and she was pleased. There was nothing to trouble her now that she had no fear of the old toad pursuing her, and wherever she sailed, everything was so beautiful. The sun shone down on the water, making it bright as liquid gold. And now she took off the sash and tied one end of it around the butterfly, fastening the other end firmly to the leaf. And on floated the leaf, faster and faster, and Thumbelina floated with it, for she was standing on it. Presently, however, a big cockchafer came buzzing past. He caught sight of Thumbelina and immediately fastened his claw around her slender waist, and flew up into a tree with her. But the green leaf still floated down the brook, and the butterfly with it, for he was bound to the leaf and could not get loose. How terrified poor Thumbelina was when the cockchafer carried her up into the tree, and how sorry she felt for the darling white butterfly which she had left tied fast to the leaf. She feared that, if he could not get away, he would perish of hunger. But the cockchafer cared nothing for that. He settled her upon the largest leaf of the tree and gave her some honey from the flowers to eat, telling her that she was very pretty, although she was not at all like a henchafer. By and by, all the chafers who lived in the tree came to pay her a visit. They looked at Thumbelina from all sides. One girl henchafer drew in her feelers contemptuously and said, "She's only got 2 legs. How funny that looks!" "She's got no feelers," said another, "and look how thin and lean her waist is." "Aye, she looks just like a human being," observed the third. "Oh, how very, very ugly she is!" cried all the lady chafers in chorus. The chafer that had carried Thumbelina could still not persuade himself that she was otherwise than pretty, but as all the rest kept repeating and insisting that she was ugly, he eventually began to think that they must be right, and determined to have nothing more to do with her. She might go wherever she wanted for all he cared, he said. And so the whole swarm flew down the tree with her and set her on a daisy. Then Thumbelina wept because she was so ugly that not even the chafers would keep company with her. And yet she was the prettiest little creature that could be imagined, soft and delicate and transparent as the loveliest rose petal. All through the summer poor Thumbelina lived alone in the wide wood. She wove herself a bed of grass blades and hung it under a large burdock leaf, which sheltered her from the rain. She dined off the honey from the flowers, and she drank from the dew that every morning spangled the leaves around her. And thus passed the summer and autumn. But then came winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung so sweetly to her flew away. Trees and flowers withered. The large burdock leaf under which she had sheltered rolled itself up and became a dry yellow stalk. Thumbelina was fearfully cold. Her clothes were wearing out, and she herself was so light and frail, poor little thing, she was nearly frozen to death. It began to snow, and every light flake that fell upon her made her feel as we would if a whole shovelful of snow was thrown upon us. For we are giants compared with a little creature, only an inch long. She wrapped herself up in a withered leaf, and she still shuddered with the cold. Just outside the wood where Thumbelina had been living lay a large cornfield, but the corn had been carried away long ago, leaving only the dry, naked stubble standing up from the hard, frozen earth. For Thumbelina, however, this stubble was like another dense wood, and oh, how she shivered with cold, and she made her way through. At last she came to a door which hid a little hole where a field mouse dwelt snugly and comfortably in a room, and a kitchen with a larder full of corn besides. Thumbelina stood at the door like a little beggar girl and begged for a small piece of barley corn, for she had had nothing to eat for 2 whole days. "You poor thing," said the field mouse, who was indeed a thoroughly good-natured creature. "Come into my warm room and dine with me." And as she soon took a great liking to Thumbelina, she said a little later, "You may dwell with me if you like all winter, but you must keep my room clean and neat and tell me stories, for I love stories dearly." And Thumbelina did all that kind old field mouse required for her, and was made very comfortable in her new abode. One day the field mouse said, "We are sure to have a visitor presently. My next door neighbor comes to see me once every week. He is better off than I am, and has large rooms in a splendid house, and walks about in a coat of beautiful black velvet. It would be a capital thing for you to see if you could secure him for your husband. But unfortunately, he is blind and cannot see you. You must tell him the prettiest stories you know." Thumbelina did not care at all about pleasing their neighbor, for he was a mole, and she did not wish to marry him. Indeed, he came and paid a visit in his black velvet suit. He was so rich and so learned, the field mouse declared, and in addition, his living quarters were 20 times larger than hers. But the sun and the pretty flowers he could not see, and that is why he could not endure them, and was always abusing them. Thumbelina was called upon to sing for his amusement, and she sang, lady bird, fly away home," and "the friar of the porter's gray." And by the time she had sung, the mole had quite fallen in love with her, because of her charm and her sweet voice. However, he said nothing yet, for he was such a prudent, cautious man. But he dug a long passage through the earth leading from their house to his, and he now gave permission to the field mouse and Thumbelina to walk in it as often as they liked. However, he bade them not to be afraid of the dead bird that lay in the passage. It was a whole bird with beak and feathers entire, and therefore he supposed it must have died quite lately, at the beginning of winter, and had just buried in this place where he had dug his passage. The mole took in his mouth a piece of dead wood, which shone like a faint fire in the dark, and went on first to light his friends through the long dark passage. When he came to the place where the dead bird lay, he thrust his broad nose up against the ceiling and pushed up the earth, as to make a big hole for daylight to come through. In the middle of the floor, there lay a swallow, his wings clinging firmly to his sides, his head and legs drawn underneath his feathers. The poor bird had evidently died of cold. Thumbelina felt so very sorry for it, for she loved all the little birds who sung and chirped so merrily to her all the way through summer. But the mole kicked the swallow with his short legs and said, "Here's a fine end for all its singing. A miserable thing it must be to be born a bird. None of my children will be birds, that is a comfort. Such creatures have nothing to do but to give it in the winter, and then they starve to death. Yes, indeed. A sensible animal like you may do so well to say, replied the field mouse. What is such a bird got with all his chirping and chirruping? When winter comes, it must starve and freeze, and this is even considering to be noble. Thumbelina said nothing at all, but when the two others had turned their backs upon the bird, she bent over it, gently smoothed down its feathers and covered its head, and kissed its closed eyes. Perhaps it was just one thing that sang so delightfully to me in summertime, she thought. How much pleasure he has given me, dear, dear bird. The mole now stopped up the hole through which the daylight had pierced, and then he saw the lady's home. But Thumbelina could not sleep that night. So she got out of bed, wove a blanket out of hay, and then went down and spread it over the dead bird. She also fetched some soft cotton wool, which she had found in the field mouse's room, and laid it around the bird so that he might be warm in the cold earth. Farewell to you, dear bird, she said. Farewell, and thanks for your beautiful song in the summertime when all the trees were green and the sun shone so warmly on us. Then she pressed her head against the bird's breast, but was terrified to feel something beating within it. That was the bird's heart. The swallow was not dead. In fact, it had lain in a faint, and now that it had been warmed, its life had returned. Every autumn, the swallows fly away to warm countries, but now and then it happens that one of them lingers behind. Then it freezes and falls down as though dead. The snow covers it, and soon its little heart stops beating. Thumbelina trembled with fear, for the bird was very large compared with her, who was only an inch in length. However, in the end she took courage, laid the cotton wool more closely round the poor swallow, and fetching a mint leaf, which had served herself as a coverlet, and spread it over the bird's head. The next night she stole out again and went down to the bird. She found that the swallow's life had quite returned, but it was so feeble that it could only do one short moment. It could open its eyes to look at Thumbelina, who stood by with a piece of dead wood in her hand, because she had no other lantern. Thank you so much, sweet little child, whispered the sick swallow. I feel delightfully warm now. Soon I will recover my strength and be able to fly again out in the warm sunshine. Oh no, she replied. It is too cold outside. The snow is coming down and it is freezing. You must stay in your warm bed. I shall nurse you back to health. Thumbelina brought a shower of water with a water kettle, and drank. And then he told her how he had torn one of his wings in a thorn bush, and therefore could not fly fast enough to keep pace with the other swallows, who were all migrating to the warm countries. At last he had fallen to the earth, and more than he could not remember. He did not know at all how he had ended up underground. However, underground he remained all through the winter, and Thumbelina was kind to him and loved him dearly. But she never said a word about him either to the mole or to the field mouse. And in that she was right, for she knew very well that they would not endure the poor swallow. As soon as spring came and the sun's warmth had penetrated the earth, the swallow said farewell to Thumbelina and opened the hole in the ceiling which the mole had made and then sealed up again. The sun shone in upon them deliciously, and the swallow asked Thumbelina whether she would like to go with him. She could sit on his back, and then would fly out together into the green wood. But Thumbelina knew it would vex the old field mouse if she were to leave without her saying goodbye. No, I cannot. I must not go, said Thumbelina. Farewell, good and pretty maiden, called the swallow, and away he flew into the sunshine. Thumbelina gazed after him, and her tears welled up in her eyes, for she loved the swallow so much. Give it, sang the bird, and he flew into the green wood. Thumbelina was now sad indeed. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine. The wheat that had been sown in the field above the field mouse's house grew up so high but it seemed a perfect forest to the poor little girl, who was only 1 inch high. "This summer you must work at getting your trousseau ready," said the field mouse to Thumbelina. "Our neighbor has made his proposal to you, which is a lucky thing for you, poor child. You shall have wool and linen material aplenty, and you should not lack anything if you become the mole's wife." So Thumbelina had to work hard at the distaff, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders to spin and weave all night and day. Every morning the mole came, as he always liked to talk about the summer coming soon to an end. Then, when the sun no longer shone so warmly, scorching the earth until it was dry as stone, then, at the beginning of autumn, his wedding to Thumbelina should take place. But this sort of conversation did not please Thumbelina at all. She was thoroughly wearied of his dullness and his prating. Every morning when the sun rose and every evening when it set, she used to steal out of doors and waited for the wind to blow the tops of the corn aside so that she could see the blue sky through the opening. Then she thought how bright and beautiful it was out there, and she wished most fervently to see the dear swallow once more. But he might never come again. Most probably had flown away in the beautiful green wood. Autumn came, and Thumbelina's trousseau was ready. "Another 4 weeks, and you shall be married," said the field mouse. But Thumbelina wept and said she would not marry the dull mole. "Fiddlesticks!" exclaimed the field mouse. "Don't be obstinate, child, or I shall bite you with my white teeth. Isn't he a handsome man in his black velvet coat? Why, even the queen must envy him. His kitchen and larder are filled. Whatever else do you want? Be thankful to get such a rich husband." So Thumbelina had to be married. The day fixed had arrived. The mole had already come to fetch the bride. She was now to dwell with him in the deep under the earth, never again to come out to the warm sunshine, which she so loved and he could not endure. The poor child was in despair at the thought that she must now bid a last farewell to the beautiful sun, of which she had at least been allowed to catch a glimpse of every now and then when she lived with the field mouse. "Farewell, you glorious sun," she cried, throwing her arms up into the air, and she walked on a little way beyond the field mouse's door. The corn was already reaped, and only the dry stubble surrounded her. "Farewell, farewell," she repeated as she clasped her tiny arms around a little flower that grew there. "Greet the dear swallow from me if you should see him." "Give it, give it!" There was a fluttering of wings above her head. She looked up, and behold, the little swallow was flying past. How pleased he was when he saw Thumbelina. She told him how she had been obliged to accept the disagreeable mole as a husband, and that she would have to dwell deep underground where the sun never shone, and she could not help weeping as she spoke. I will be here soon," said the swallow, "and I shall be far away to the warm countries. Will you come with me? I shall carry you on my back. All you need to do is tie yourself fast with your sash, and thus we will fly away to the dumb mole and the dark rooms, far over the mountains to those countries where the sun shines even more brightly than here, where it is always summer, and where the flowers blossom all year long. Come and fly with me, sweet little Thumbelina, who saved my life when I lay frozen in the dark cellars of the earth." "Oh, yes, I will go with you," said Thumbelina. She seated herself on the bird's back, her feet resting on the outspread wings, and she tied her girdle firmly around one of the strongest feathers. And then the swallow soared high into the air and flew way over forest and lake, over mountains covered with snow all year round. And when Thumbelina shivered as she breathed the frosty air, she crept down under the bird's warm feathers, and only her little head peered forth, eager to behold all the glory and beauty beneath her. At last they reached the warm countries. There the sun shone far more brightly than in her native land. The sky seemed twice as high, and in sloping hills grew a rich abundance of the loveliest green and purple grapes. Lemons and oranges were seen in groves. The fragrance of myrtle and balsam filled the air, and by the wayside children played with large bright butterflies. But the swallow did not rest there. No, he flew on, and the scenery seemed to grow more and more beautiful. Near a calm blue lake overhung by lofty trees stood an ancient palace of white marble. Vines trailed up along slender pillars, and on the top of them, among the green leaves and waving tendrils, many a swallow had built his nest. And one of these nests belonged to the swallow on whose back Thumbelina was riding. "This is my house," said the swallow. "Now you choose for yourself the prettiest flower growing beneath us. I will take you to it, and you shall make a happy home here." "That will be wonderful!" exclaimed Thumbelina, clapping her tiny hands. On the green turf beneath there lay the fragments of white marble column, which had fallen to the ground and broken in three pieces. And around these fragments grew some large, beautiful white flowers. The swallow flew down with Thumbelina and set her on one of the broad petals. But how surprised she was when she saw sitting in the very heart of the flower a little mannikin, fair and transparent as though he were made of glass, wearing the prettiest gold crown on his head and the brightest, most delicate wings on his shoulders, was scarcely a whit larger than Thumbelina herself. In every blossom there dwelt such a fairy, man or woman, but this one was the king of them all. "Oh, how handsome he is!" whispered Thumbelina to the swallow. The fairy prince was quite startled at the sudden descent of the swallow, who was giant compared with him. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was delighted, for she was the loveliest maiden he had ever seen. So he took off his gold crown from his head, set it upon hers, and asked her name, and whether she would be his bride and reign as queen over the flower spirits. He, of course, was quite different man from the son of the ugly tulip toad, or the blond, dull mole with his black velvet coat. So Thumbelina said yes to the beautiful prince. And then the fairy men or fairy women came out, each from a separate flower. Gracefully and courteously they paid their homage, and every one of them brought her a present. But the best of all the presents was a pair of transparent wings, which were fastened on Thumbelina's shoulders, and enabled her to fly from flower to flower. That was a joy, and the swallow sat in his nest above and sang his sweetest song. In his heart, however, he was sad, for he loved Thumbelina, and would have wished never to part from her. "You shall be no longer named Thumbelina," said the king of the flowers to his dainty, graceful little wife. "You are much too lovely for such an ugly name. We shall call you Maya." "Farewell, farewell," said the swallow, and away he flew to the warm countries, and far back to the north. There he had a little nest just above the window of a man who writes stories for children. "Give it, give it, give it," he sang to him every morning, and it is from him that we heard this beautiful story.